Wellness Rhythm Show. Find your rhythm. Live your wellness.
Y'all, here is a stat that genuinely stopped me in my tracks. Researchers at the Mayo Clinic found that sedentary older adults who began a structured exercise program showed cellular changes that made their muscle tissue look decades younger after just 12 weeks. 12 weeks.
That's the one that got me too. And this wasn't some small, easy-to-dismiss study. We're talking measurable changes at the mitochondrial level, the actual energy factories inside your cells. Exercise wasn't slowing aging, it was partially reversing it.
Which means the conversation we always have, it's too late to start, is not just wrong. It's kind of the opposite of the truth.
Exactly. So today we're digging into what movement actually does to your biology after 50. Not the vague, stay active, it's good for you version, the specific, fascinating, slightly mind-blowing version.
Let's start with the basics, because I think most people, myself included honestly, have this mental model where after a certain age, your body is just declining. And exercise slows the decline, but that's not quite right, is it?
Right. Here's what I've learned. That model is outdated. The more accurate picture, based on work from researchers like Dr. Mark Tarnopolsky at McMaster University, is that exercise is genuinely one of the only interventions we know of that can improve biological function rather than just preserve it.
Improve, not just maintain.
Improve muscle tissue quality, cardiovascular efficiency, cognitive function, metabolic flexibility. These can measurably get better in older adults who begin exercising, even if they were sedentary beforehand.
Okay, let's unpack the muscle piece first, because I think that's where most people's minds go. And there's a term I've been hearing a lot: sarcopenia. David, can you break that down without making it terrifying?
Sarcopenia is essentially the age-related loss of muscle mass and strength. It begins gradually around your 30s, accelerates after 50, and if left unchecked, it's a significant driver of falls, fractures, loss of independence. The World Health Organization now recognizes it as an official muscle disease, so it's serious.
But here's the thing though, if left unchecked is doing a lot of work in that sentence.
It is. Resistance training, lifting weights, bodyweight exercises, resistance bands, directly counteracts sarcopenia. The research is remarkably consistent on this. Studies published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research show that adults in their 60s, 70s, even 80s can build meaningful muscle mass with structured resistance training.
I will admit, I have started and abandoned a strength routine more times than I'd like to count. And every time I think, okay, but at 38, I still have time. What I hadn't thought about is that starting now is literally biology preparation for what comes next.
That's exactly the right framing. The muscle you build in your 40s and 50s is, in a very real sense, insurance. You're building what researchers call your physiological reserve. More muscle now means more to lose before it becomes a functional problem later.
That reframe actually helps me more than exercise is good for you ever has. Okay, so we've got muscle. What about the brain piece? Because I feel like this is where it gets really interesting.
This is where it gets extraordinary. The work coming out of the lab of Dr. Wendy Suzuki at NYU, she's a neuroscientist who studies exercise and the brain, shows that aerobic exercise increases the production of a protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor,
which she calls miracle grow for the brain, and honestly, that description has lived in my head rent-free.
Because it's accurate. BDNF promotes the growth and survival of neurons, and it's particularly active in the hippocampus, the brain region most associated with memory and learning, and the hippocampus is also the region that typically shrinks with age.
So aerobic exercise is literally helping grow the part of your brain that aging tries to shrink.
That's the finding, and not in a speculative way. We're talking MRI-confirmed hippocampal volume increases in older adults who did regular aerobic exercise compared to those who did stretching only, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences.
Y'all, let me tell you, if that doesn't make you want to go for a brisk walk right now, I don't know what will. And speaking of which, if you are finding this useful, please hit like and subscribe. It genuinely helps us reach more people who could use an informed friend in their corner.
Appreciated. And it's worth noting, the type of exercise matters somewhat, but not as much as people assume. Dr. Suzuki's research suggests even 20 to 30 minutes of moderate aerobic activity, 3 times a week, produces measurable cognitive benefits.
Which brings me to something I want to push back on a little, because I've heard people say yoga or walking doesn't really count. And that frustrates me.
It should. That's an oversimplification. Walking, particularly brisk walking, is aerobic exercise. A meta-analysis published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine found that even relatively modest amounts of walking significantly reduced risk of cognitive decline, cardiovascular disease, and all-cause mortality in older adults.
So we're not asking people to train for a marathon. We're talking about movement that fits real life.
Which matters enormously when we talk about adherence. The best exercise program is the one that actually gets done, and there's solid behavioral science behind that. Research from the American College of Sports Medicine shows that enjoyment is one of the strongest predictors of long-term exercise consistency, particularly in adults over 50.
Okay, here's where I want to introduce a little productive friction. Because David, I know your instinct is always to follow the data, and I respect that. But I think there's a version of evidence-based fitness advice that ends up being paralyzing.
How do you mean?
Someone hears resistance training twice a week, aerobic exercise 150 minutes per week, balance work, mobility work. And they look at their actual life and go, I can maybe do two things. And then they do nothing because they feel like they're already failing before they start.
That's a fair challenge, and I'll concede that the research on dose is more nuanced than the guidelines sometimes imply. A 2019 study in JAMA Network Open found that even one session of vigorous exercise per week, what they called weekend warrior patterns, produced significant cardiovascular and mortality benefits compared to being sedentary.
That is the stat I want plastered on every gym wall.
The guidelines are targets, not thresholds for worthiness. Something is almost always better than nothing, and the evidence supports that strongly.
Let's talk about balance specifically for a second, because this is one I think people underestimate. It seems unglamorous, but falls are genuinely one of the leading causes of serious health events in adults over 65.
The Centers for Disease Control reports that falls are the leading cause of fatal and non-fatal injuries in older adults. And here's what's interesting. Balance is trainable. It's a skill, not just a fixed attribute that declines. Tai Chi in particular has an impressive evidence base. A Cochrane review, that's about as rigorous as systematic reviews get, found Tai Chi significantly reduced fall risk in older adults.
Which feels relevant to listeners who maybe aren't ready for a gym, but could absolutely join a Tai Chi class or even follow one on YouTube.
Absolutely. And yoga has similar evidence for balance and proprioception, your body's sense of where it is in space. Both are legitimate, both are backed by research.
I want to circle back to something you said early on, that mitochondrial finding, because I think that's the thing that hit me hardest. Your cells can actually look younger. What is that mechanism?
So mitochondria, the energy-producing structures in cells, degrade with age. They become less efficient, fewer in number. This is called mitochondrial dysfunction, and it's considered one of the primary biological hallmarks of aging. Exercise, particularly interval-style training, stimulates a process called mitochondrial biogenesis, literally the creation of new mitochondria.
And that's the Mayo Clinic study you were referencing?
Yes, a 2017 study from the Mayo Clinic published in Cell Metabolism. They compared high-intensity interval training in younger and older adults and found that in older adults, HIIT actually reversed many of the age-related decline patterns at the cellular level. The older adults showed a more dramatic benefit than the younger participants.
Which is so counterintuitive. We assume young people benefit more from hard exercise. But it turns out older bodies are actually more responsive to certain kinds of training at the cellular level.
The researchers described it as the body's cellular machinery being turned on after a period of relative dormancy. It's genuinely striking.
Okay, before we close out, I know some of our listeners are in that sandwich generation, taking care of kids, taking care of aging parents, barely breathing, and I want to speak to that directly. Because the advice to exercise more when you're already stretched thin can feel dismissive.
Acknowledged. And the honest answer from the research is that the benefits scale even with small inputs. 10-minute walks have measurable effects on mood, blood glucose regulation, and cardiovascular markers. A study from the University of Utah found that even brief bouts of activity, under 15 minutes, accumulated across the day, contributed meaningfully to overall health outcomes.
So we're not asking for an hour. We're asking for what you can actually give.
And sometimes that's 10 minutes after lunch and 10 minutes before bed. That counts.
All right, here's the one thing I want everyone to take away today. Movement after 50 isn't damage control. It is active biology. Your cells respond, your brain responds, your muscles respond. And the response can be positive even when starting late. The best time to start was 20 years ago. The second best time is this week.
And if I can add the practical footnote, pick one thing, one walk, one resistance band session, one Tai Chi video. The science strongly suggests that doing one thing consistently will produce results. Perfection is not the mechanism. Consistency is.
That's it, y'all. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. If this episode gave you something useful, and I hope it did, please like and subscribe so we can keep showing up in your feed with more of this.
Right, and we'll see you next time. Hopefully slightly more mobile than before.
Ha! That's the goal. Take care of yourselves. This show is part of the VoxCrea.AI system. If you want a show like this for your organization without building it yourself,
Go to VoxCrea.AI and request a sample episode.